Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. And this episode, we have a very special conversation with camera store owner Burke Seim, and really a great guy who I've come to know over, at this point, several years. And that's a conversation you certainly want to hear. As always, the podcast is brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance, where you can go online to mdphotoalliance.org, check out what they have going on in terms of contests, sponsorships, information, talks, all sorts of elements that really any photographer can benefit from. So I definitely encourage you to check out the website, and be sure, as you're listening to this podcast or afterwards, to go online and subscribe to the podcast, click to follow, as they say. Hopefully you like it, you comment. That way you don't miss any future episodes, and that way it helps us with the algorithm that somebody out there is creating to make sure we can spread the word and get the podcast out to the most people possible. The podcast is available on most major platforms, including Apple and Amazon and Spotify and Spreaker and on and on and on. So lots of ways to get it on your phone, lots of ways to listen on your computer. It's just, we try to make it as available. You can also go on the Maryland Photo Alliance website. You can click through and you can listen there. We're on YouTube, so kind of everywhere. And without further ado, let me introduce our guest and thank Burke Seim for joining me. Burke, great to have you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak on the podcast.
Yeah. Over the past many years, as a photographer myself, I get a gut feel about how the industry is changing. So, one case in point would be there's never been more need for imagery. Where we get the imagery is changing. It used to be a lot of newspapers and magazines, and now, as we kind of all know, magazines are less in number. They are in many times converting from printed magazines to web delivered magazines. People are viewing imagery on their phones, not necessarily in hand or on a computer. And so along with that evolution, or some people may say like de-evolution, we see a lot of camera manufacturers that are trying to address kind of where the market is now. And many people say with the advance of cell phones and the advance of the quality of the cameras in the cell phones, that has really taken down what we used to call the point and shoot market. So, what, from a retailer perspective, the owner of Service Photo in Baltimore, what do you see as kind of the biggest changes last 5 years, last 10 years in your business?
Well, we do something a little different, which is we specialize in camera equipment itself. So not so much in the services where we do film or photo processing or scanning or anything like that. So we're really involved with the camera gear itself. And of course, 20-ish years ago, there was a huge evolution from film-based gear to digital gear. And then over the next 20 or so years, the improvements have been incredible. But over the last, say, 5+ years, there's been even more change that, I'm not saying we didn't expect it, but we didn't expect it to come so quickly. So what we've seen is that camera gear had kind of plateaued in a way. What I mean by that is the quality of the products were so good that photographers didn't feel the need to necessarily buy the next announcement, because for the previous dozen years or so, whenever a new product came out, photographers had to improve with the new products. Not so much, except in 2018, we saw Canon and Nikon jump into the mirrorless camera market in a big way, and that was after Sony had come in a few years earlier and really taken the marketplace by storm and really got a few people thinking about Sony as a major camera manufacturer, where previously they had not been thought of that. So over the last 5 years, we've seen systems evolve that have allowed people to use the hundreds of millions of lenses that are out there in the marketplace that have been used over the last 20 years. And they've adapted the older lenses to the new cameras. And then, of course, as photographers are wont to do, they see these new products being introduced and they really want to make the switch to a lighter, more technologically advanced, better camera system that offers them more capabilities and more options. So it's really been a very eventful last 5 years, believe it or not.
And with that, there seems to be, again, from an outsider perspective, there seems to be, whether you call it flux or a shakeout period. I mean, I remember when I first started really looking at cameras with some amount of, I'll call it intention. You had brands like Pentax, you had Vivitar, you had, the ones we have now, but you also had Minolta. You had brands that were extremely relevant, extremely mainstream. But now, Vivitar, I believe, is gone. Minolta, not sure where they are in the market. Olympus, not sure where they are. Pentax, not sure where they are. So you have, as you mentioned, the emergence of a behemoth in Sony, just a massive company. And then you have the tried and true Canon, you have Nikon, and then you have some of the other, brands like your Phase Ones and Hasselblad and Leicas. Leicas may be kind of an entity to itself, but what have you seen from your perspective of how the real players still standing in the market have changed over maybe the last 10 years?
Well, I will tell you that the big four are Canon, Sony, Nikon, and Fuji, followed by a handful of others. Now that handful includes Panasonic Lumix, um, Olympus is still out there, Pentax is still out there. Um, they all make really, really great cameras. So there's one thing for sure, and that is there is no such thing as a bad camera. They are all very, very high quality products. However, the different companies have different strengths. And if you want to be a player with just a huge company like Sony, you've got to have a lot of money behind you so that you can get a certain amount of market share. And that is what I think Canon and Nikon constantly used to fight for market share. Now it's Sony, Canon, and Nikon, I think, has decided that they're okay with their niche, which is a very large niche. So I hate to even call it a niche, but they've got a different segment. Fuji has a completely different segment, more street photographers and things like that. And everyone else is just kind of takes a big fall off. Olympus and Panasonic have very small percentages of the marketplace. So you basically got three large players with Nikon, Sony, and Canon. Fuji kind of off to the side a little bit. Um, Sony is a very interesting story because they purchased the Minolta lens mount and all the Minolta camera technology,
Okay.
and they developed a series of SLR cameras, and no one cared. They were still far behind the others, and so that's when they decided to just scrap it and develop these mirrorless cameras. So they were really the leader in mirrorless photography, and they still hold a very high position. Although I think as we speak today, Canon is probably the market share leader. Canon has always been just a huge, huge company. And what Canon likes to do is they like to have a little bit of something for everyone. So Canon has some really serious professional models of cameras and lenses, and they also have some very small consumer-based Rebel type stuff, and it's all wonderful, wonderful stuff. But these camera companies have all just kind of found their place in the marketplace, and they're trying to expand upon that with their own identities.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I started talking from the outset, I mentioned kind of the evolution of our cell phone cameras and how that's had an impact on the point and shoot market. My question to you, and I don't know that you can have a scientific answer, more so just a gut feel, but do you feel that explosion of everybody having a camera on their phone has taken away from the point and shoot business to where overall it's been negative as a retailer, or has it gotten more people involved in photography in general, so now when they want to take a step further, now they're looking for a standalone camera? Has it gotten more people in the pool, or has it, good or bad, I guess, is my question.
Well, it's done a little bit of each. So when cell phones really got much better cameras than they initially had, the thought was this is going to kill certain photography businesses. And I think it did take some places down. People that were dependent on photo processing and printing, they're no longer in business. So um, it really did change the landscape. And at that same point in time, of course, when cameras got hot, digital cameras and phones got hot, everybody wanted to sell them. So that brought some new people into the marketplace while some of the kind of the specialty dealers might have gone away. Um, and then cameras got really, really fantastic in phones. And, billions of images are taken every single day. So we thought that might be bad initially, but what it's turned out is to be really a blessing in disguise. Imaging is a huge part of people's lives. And when I say people's lives, I mean everyone on the planet pretty much. So the reality is that consumers no longer purchase cameras. They don't buy cameras at all because they already have a camera in their phone. However, a small percentage of those billions of people using cameras find that they have a need for something better. Maybe it's the lighting, maybe it's the focal length of the lens, whatever it is, they need something better. They want to be set apart from the rest, or they just want to better themselves for their own liking. So that's when they turn to cameras, and that's when they look to a camera, standalone camera that you would carry around with you. Which someone who's, I want to say, over 30 or over 40, the idea of a standalone camera is not foreign. But to a 20-year-old, having a camera as a separate piece and not something that's incorporated in your phone, they just don't understand that oftentimes until they find that need. So what it's done for us is we now specialize in that small percentage of the public that wants something better. So our business, our customers, basically consist of course, professional photographers and industry and things like that. But the vast majority of our customers are what we would like to call a serious enthusiast. They just love photography for whatever reason. They love it. They're very passionate about it. And I would tell you that if you take a look at the membership base of something like the Maryland Photo Alliance, that's their base of members.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And, there's always the question, as a photographer, is it the end result, the image that you create that drives you, or is it simply the enjoyment of being out in whatever environment you choose and the act of photography? And there's no wrong answer. It's just photography is something that a lot of people just really enjoy.
Well, I will tell you, Mitch, the one thing I tell people all day long, I think the people around here probably get sick and tired of hearing it from me, is that there is no wrong or right in photography. There's no right or wrong. It's what's right for you. Because how many times we've heard, well, my friend has this, so I need to get this, or my friend did this, or I saw this online and I need to do this. We 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 talk people off the ledge sometimes. We save them lots of wasted time and money by kind of pointing them in the right direction. And that's a very big deal for us because we very much enjoy it. But yeah, there's no right or wrong. It's what's best for each individual person. So I do think the enjoyment factor has turned into a very, very important, if not the most important part of photography these days.
And I think, I'm a professional, but I know I see plenty of people when I stop by, to service photo, and I see whether it's me or it's other customers, getting input from your staff, which is, generally tenured staff. So you have a lot of people who've been there for quite a while, who know the customers, know the gear, and they ask the right questions. And so, it's not just, I need a camera because my friend has this. It's, well, tell me what type of photography you do. Tell me what your interests are. Tell me what you're working with now. So as you said, it sort of takes a person who's gung ho and works with that but asks important questions. So the person is making an educated, buying decision, whatever that looks like. So yeah, I've definitely been in your store and I've seen those conversations between staff and customers taking place, so many times.
Well, at the end of the day, Mitch, I will tell you that if you have the right camera and selection of lenses, you're going to pick it up and use it, and you're going to love it. If for any reason there's something, however large or small it may be, that just bothers you or you don't like, you're not going to pick up your camera that often. You're not going to use it that often. And then what good does it do you? So our goal is to really make sure that people have the right stuff that's making them happy for whatever type of photography they're doing, so that they pick it up and they use it a lot, because that's what it's there for.
Yeah, no, and it makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you about what I guess, it's funny, it was the norm, then it wasn't the norm, now it's maybe coming back. So when we all graduated from film photography to digital, digital was the next thing. It's what everybody's doing. Yeah, as we know, Kodak, essentially went away, film went away, and then there became a movement to kind of bring film back and go back to film and slowing down and all this kind of thing that a lot of the rhetoric and conversation around film brought about for lots of reasons. So my question to you is, in your business, have you seen that comeback, if that's a fair word, of film sustain, or did it come back a little and now it's kind of maintaining at a lower hum, or is it growing in what you're seeing?
Well, it's interesting. It's actually very hard to answer that question because each week brings something a little different. We come from a place where we go back to the early, well, the entire decade of the 90s, I would say. Our store was filled with refrigeration. We sold over 10,000 rolls of film week in and week out. Most people bought film by the hundreds. And so that's where we come from. So of course today, film is tiny compared to that. Um, I will tell you that film was almost non-existent pre-pandemic, except for black and white film, primarily used by students. And really within that range, really primarily used by high school students. A lot of people that went to school for photography, if they were in college, they had already completed perhaps the film end of things, and some pursued it, but most did not. So um, film was really at its lowest ebb. But then suddenly people had lots of time on their hands, and they had the luxury of being able to take things slow. And they went online and they saw these really cool vintage products, what in their mind were vintage products, and they maybe picked them up very inexpensively, and then they would try them and they would try and learn. So film started to pick back up. And I will tell you that I think it has peaked. I don't know. I think it's perhaps come down a little bit since, say, 2021, 22, but I think it's at a steady pace right now. There are companies manufacturing film chemicals for consumer use, so you can go and play with developing your film. But I think that most people have it developed and scanned, and then they get that link and they check out their images online and they save them, so they don't get a stack of prints like you used to 30 years ago. But I think film is um it's not standing still. There are new types of film and new brands of film coming out all the time, and it's really a much younger demographic using film, and they're really kind of having fun with it. And I don't know that they have any serious expectations. I think they're very happy just experimenting and having fun.
I remember growing up and using film, and I would go to, and here's a name from the past. I would go to Ritz camera or a pen camera, and I would drop off my roll of 36, and I would wait, not even an hour. This goes back to when, you're talking about, 4 or 5 days, and it would come back. But I remember there was this anticipation of what was going to show up. And, I can see both sides of it. In one hand, when you have a roll of 24, which sounds incredible, so
Right.
little, or 36, you wait and you wait and you wait to, as a young person, see, was what I shot in focus? Was it overexposed? And you got it, and it was a series of yay or 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 whatever. And now, of course, if you have even a small memory card, it's going to hold 300-400 images,
Oh, thousands. Yeah.
or if not more. And so, you know, from an outsider perspective, it seems like to me that the Ritzes and of others of the world who had developing, whether it was in store or it went out to wherever it went out to, that print business was like the day in, day out revenue, kind of bread and butter. And of course, they want to sell cameras, of course, but the revenue from the developing was kind of a given. They could plan to that, they could track the revenue. And then when that went away, for the most part, because of digital, that whole line of revenue that they could kind of count on week in, week out was almost non-existent. Was that somewhat like the death knell, a lot of those larger print heavy camera shops, or do you think it was something greater?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The death of those stores and those businesses came a lot quicker than we had anticipated. We always knew that the margin for profit, the money that was being made was, we used to say they were printing money when they were printing pictures.
Right.
And that was the way Ritz operated. That's Ritz had over 1,000 stores at one time. A small regional chain like Penn had, I think, 8 stores at one time. These were all really great businesses. And then what happened as people needed their services less and less, when they saw a 20-25% decrease in the amount of business, all of a sudden their business model was broken. And um, margins in selling electronics like cameras and accessories are very, very thin. Um, they're very small, and that's why there's less than 100 camera dealers in the United States right now. There's just you have to have it figured out so that you can stay in business, and it's not about making lots of money. Whereas 30 years ago, the Ritzes and Penns had very, very profitable businesses with lots of staff and lots of locations. And once that print business was gone or started to decrease, it accelerated the adoption of digital photography by photographers everywhere, simply because they couldn't get that 1 hour turnaround. It turned into once a week turnaround, which turned into several weeks turnaround, and that just wasn't good enough for people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Service Photo, I believe, is the only camera store specific to the gear that's in Maryland. Am I correct with that?
Um, yes, and to my knowledge, we are the only store that does what we do and has been the only store since about 2012 when Penn Camera went out of business.
That's amazing. Well,
I it's still hard. I was sorry. I was just gonna say it's still hard for me to believe it as I say it constantly because I do have to explain that to people almost daily. They have no idea that we're the only store.
yeah, well, I was talking to somebody the other day about small towns and how, you see these small towns now and there's nothing there anymore. But if you went back years ago, there was a bank and a general store and, a lunch counter. And, it's just the way things kind of evolved, and certainly with online selling, that's all changed. But, for listeners who may not be familiar, who maybe aren't familiar, um, let's give them a snapshot of how your company, Service Photo, got started, because it's an impressive history, and it's kind of incredible going back to its beginnings in 1948. Can you kind of walk almost through like a timeline of that?
So my grandfather worked at a camera store back in the 40s, and the story that I heard was that he got a little pissed off at his boss one day and decided to open a business directly across the street from him on Greenmount Avenue in downtown Baltimore, right near Memorial Stadium. And so that's what ended up happening. And through the years, my father ended up working there and then taking over the business unexpectedly. And then I started working there. I was a finance and an investments person. That's what I went to school for, and that's what I had always intended to do for a living. While I was looking for a job, I I was working for my dad at the store, just kind of killing time while I was getting a job. And one day I got a job and I left. And as I was sitting in that office, basically being a stockbroker in the late 80s, I ended up quitting the very first day of that job. And I said, I need to go back to this business because even though I'm not a photographer myself, photographers are really nice people. And it's something very tangible that there was something about the business that drew me back in. On top of that, I also knew that my father was kind of nearing the end of his rope, and I looked at things from a very different perspective, and I wanted to do something differently. So I went back to my father and I said, "Look, here's the deal. I either need to buy one of your three stores because we had a store in Baltimore, Service Photo. We had Towson Photo up in Towson. And then we had a store in the Rotunda Mall down here called Rotunda Photo, which was just a simple processing film and print drop-off place. Um, my goal was to do something different. And I told my father, I'm either going to have to buy one of your stores. And if you don't want to sell me one of the stores, I'm going to open up another store. And I think you won't be around in a couple years because I've got an idea. I've got a new way of doing things. And I've got some ideas that I hopefully will work. Now, I was 26 when this discussion was taking place. So,
Wow.
of course, my father thought that I would be out of business in a couple years. And he humored me. And I ended up buying one business with the idea that I was going to take care of all the complaints that I heard from photographers. And what I was hearing at that time was we can't get things at good prices. The price levels, film is much cheaper. There was a new thing called mail order, and it was you could call up an 800 number in New York and they would ship it to you via UPS, and you could get products much cheaper. And those products were not only cameras, but they were film and things like that. So my goal was to provide a source for professional photographers and governments. We used to sell pallet upon pallet filled with Polaroid film. And that was something that we did for the city of Baltimore and Hopkins and all kinds of industrial businesses. So while others were taking in rolls of film and making high margins on consumer photo business, we were a very low margined, higher volume commercial photography type business. And that's what we did. Um, when the big shift happened in the early 2000s and people started going out of business, we were the one left. We were used to working on low margin. That has continued to this day, unfortunately. It is what it is, but it gave us the experience to do what we had to do to make it work. So now it's evolved over time into not only new gear, but we do a lot of trade-ins. We sell a lot of used camera gear, and of course, all of the accessories that go with all of this stuff. Because quite honestly, it's the accessories that you purchase that really make your gear work to its fullest potential. And that's where kind of, in my opinion, that's where online falls down a bit because the quality of the stuff online is not always that wonderful, and you sometimes don't find out until it's too late. So, that's kind of where the business has evolved, and that's why we like working with people, and helping them out every day.
Yeah, I was actually at your place about a month ago, and like I think most photographers, we have more camera bags than we ever need. And I came across I came across this bag by a brand I was not familiar with. The brand is called Earth, UR,
Mhm.
and it just had this combination of an internal pocket for iPad, internal pocket for a computer, and then it had this little pouch that you zip into the outside that could house, in my case, it could house two small cameras, and it was this sort of unusual use case. But because I was there physically, not online, I was there, I was able to unzip it and take out the pouches and just kind of put it on my back. And I thought, this thing is incredible. So I just got back from about 10 days of travel, and a friend of mine saw this backpack and said, where'd you get that? So I became an advertisement for you. But it's just, you're right. When you see something online, sometimes, it's almost like a commodity type thing. I need that. They have that. It'll be here. Great. But when it comes to investing in something that you're going to use for the long haul or even the short run, yeah, there's no substitute for kicking the tires and trying it on for sure.
Absolutely. And it all goes back to that. There's no right and wrong.
Mhm.
Each person is an individual with individual needs. And just because all the reviews are good for a product online doesn't mean that that's the best product for you. And there's no substitute, in my opinion, for actually hands-on seeing, touching, and just learning really, really quickly. It doesn't take a lot, but it can make a huge difference in the long run.
I want to pick up on something you said because I think listeners will have heard it and thought, huh, that's odd. So you mentioned you're not a photographer. So,
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about that. Obviously, there's a 180-degree difference from someone who owns a camera store and then someone who, for whatever reason, says that's just not really my thing. So, how have you married your obviously investment literally and emotionally in the store, but you just choose not to be a kind of ongoing photographer?
Well, I mean, growing up in this business, I was always exposed, no pun intended, to photography. I saw it from, my earliest memories had service photo were there, and certainly. And so I was in, I certainly became somewhat of a photographer during my teen years, I would say. And I even ran a small business. I went to Villanova University and I ran a small photo business up there for a short period of time. Um, but you know, I never really had that huge passion that so many photographers have that just really makes it very special for them. I was very matter of fact about this as a product and a service. And when I was working for my dad in the store, I really learned a lot about the business aspect of it. And working with vendors and working not only working with customers across the counter and on the phone and via email and communications, but working with the vendors. And when you're working with the likes of Nikon and Sony and Canon, and you're working with credit managers and sales managers and things like this, um, that is a whole different set of rules and a whole different set of nuance that um, you really need to be focused on those things. So as I was focusing on those things, my ability to spend any real time with the camera gear and using it for my own personal pleasure, that kind of went away. Because when I purchased this business, it was a situation where the business was pretty much going to go out of business within a year if I didn't take over. So I was in deep and I was young and 24/7 I was working service photo. And I would argue to this day I still do the same thing. But yeah, there's just been no real time. And quite honestly, while I enjoy photography, there's that higher level of passion just is not there. Meanwhile, the people that I'm surrounded by are unbelievably passionate. I mean, this is what they do 24/7. Not only the folks that work here. Now we've got 14 people that work here. They're all photographers other than me and the bookkeeper. And they absolutely love every aspect of it. And they all have their own little niche and specialty. But the customers that we see, people that have been coming in for 30 years, our demographics have changed. Our customer makeup certainly has changed over the years, but there's one constant, and that's that people are very excited about what they do. They absolutely love it. And at the end of the day, they're really good people. They're really nice folks. And that's what kind of makes it all worthwhile, to be very honest with you.
How do you think that um, service photos, social media, and just the platform of social media have waved the flag or carried the torch, if you will, for your company and photography in general?
Well, social media is huge for photography in general. I can tell you that so many images just are out there. There's so many images being put out into social media that are important. And quite honestly, people want better imaging because of that social media presence. And so they're upping their game in one way or another. We absolutely see that all the time. I work with major ad agencies who um, have purchased medium format cameras. that are not inexpensive at all. And when I've asked, what are you doing with this? They'll say, uh, believe it or not, we're putting out Facebook ads, but we need them to be the best Facebook ads you've ever seen. And so it's amazing that social media has just taken over as it is, but it's also allowed us as a small business to advertise um, in a very cost-effective manner and just kind of engage with our customers. Um, you know, I'm the advertising guy. So if Nikon or Sony or Canon sends me some product literature and they want me to advertise it via social media, that's what I'll do. Meanwhile, my staff is providing interactions with our customers and sharing our customers' images, doing something completely separate from what I'm doing, but under the same guise of service photo. They're sharing other people's posts and imaging and kind of making them feel like more of a community. We've been doing that for a couple of years now. It's and everybody's very happy. At this stage of the game, we are really starting to expand our YouTube presence, and that is something that this year we're going to kind of start from scratch and make that a much larger presence, with just some simple tips and some simple instructions real quick on how to do certain things that we find that photographers should know how to do, but sometimes ask us to do for them instead, which we're happy to do, but we also want them to know. So we just try and engage with the community and really keep that community intact because it's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that, with the camera clubs throughout Maryland and just in general, that sense of community really comes through. You have so many people that are involved, and people generally people like being around people with like interests. So it makes sense. As you're talking about this investment of time and evolving the YouTube channel and social media, and there's a lot of good stuff that's going on in the larger photographic world and things that you have going on directly. But are there things that are frustrating, in 2024 about either the business or just things that you scratch your head about?
Well, I mean, and the photography industry is always changing. And over the years, I've been frustrated and challenged by so many different things. But the one thing I do see one thing today that kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit. We at Service Photo, we buy and accept and trade a lot of camera gear. So we have a very good online selection of used gear. We have a lot in our store, and just used camera gear is a very big deal because so many people, as they're transitioning to mirrorless cameras and lenses, they will trade in their SLRs or trade in their previous generation mirrorless cameras. So we do a lot of buying and selling of used gear. Now, we've been the only brick and mortar camera store in Maryland for over 10 years. However, what frustrates me to no end, and I wish I could find an answer for it, but I don't know if I ever will, is that as I buy and accept and trade a lot of gear from both new customers and people that I've known for a very long time, what I see every day is that a lot of that gear, the vast majority of that gear, was not originally purchased from us.
Mm.
And what I know is that because we're one of the only places that does the level of used cameras business that we do in as terms and as far as buying and accepting and trade, people come to us because they don't want to do it themselves. But when they're given a choice, they often don't choose us to buy their new gear. And that to me is very frustrating because for the last, I would say 15 years, photographers will have noticed that the legitimate prices of camera gear are pretty much the same every single place. So I, in this day and age, for at least a dozen years, have been able to say our prices are as good or better than a Best Buy, an Amazon, a B&H, or whoever. And we also, by the way, take their gift cards as a form of payment. So if you got an Amazon gift card for Christmas or a B&H gift card or a Best Buy gift card, you can buy stuff from us and we'll take that as payment. We've got a way to make that work. So we want to make sure that photographers don't have a reason to buy elsewhere. Um, because we'd really like to have their business. It's the only way that we can keep going through the years. So it is very frustrating for me to see that, but we're constantly trying to change that. And, kind of making our online store a little bit better is one way of doing that, because I will tell you that being located in Baltimore is a wonderful thing. At the same point in time, a lot of people will say to me, we don't come to Baltimore anymore. We just don't travel from whichever county it might be. And so we have an online store, and we can we can deliver products faster than anybody else. So that's our goal for the future. That's how we're going to hopefully stay relevant for both those who want to come in physically and those who do not.
Also, I think that, there was a point in time where if your price for something was the same as someone from out of state's price for something, they could ship it and avoid state taxes. Now, you're still going to pay the state tax for Maryland when you buy it from whatever other city or Amazon or whomever. So, that sales tax argument, to call it that, it doesn't apply anymore. So
It doesn't apply anymore, and that has made life a little bit easier. That wasn't something that did frustrate me for many, many years, and that has changed the landscape dramatically. But, at the end of the day, um, our competitors are businesses that do billions and billions of dollars in sales every year. They are huge. And we are a small 15-person company that is able to compete with them on price and beat them in service. So it's still not as easy perhaps to purchase from us as it is, if you've got these accounts online, but we hope to try and connect with people and perhaps make them hesitate for a second and think, oh yeah, I want to go to Service Photo. I want to support local. Not just to simply support local, but because they're getting hopefully the best deal out there and a much higher level of service. That's what we're hoping to provide.
so let me tie into that. So if a person is going to come in and either they want to go from using their phone as their camera, or maybe a couple of years ago they got a point and shoot, or maybe their first camera, but it's time to evolve. It's time to get that next camera, that next lens or two. When that person comes to the counter and says, I don't know what I want in terms of brand or specific camera or lenses, but I want to, kind of upgrade. How does that conversation go between you or your staff with that person? I'm just thinking of the people who are listening, who are thinking of, in 2024, I want to get that next something. I want to go on that trip. I want to be prepared with, more updated gear than what I have right now. How do you see those conversations, in your store?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is identify what it is that they want to accomplish. What are their goals? And then what are they using now? Because you don't want to give someone a bunch of options that are all very foreign to them. They need to feel comfortable with them. So perhaps if they have a specific brand of something already and they're familiar with those menus and they like those menus, then we might want to continue down that same path with higher level gear. But if they say that they don't like this, or they want something different, then there's lots of options to show people. Unfortunately, one of the things that we do have to address is budget. And it's a big part of the equation. And so we can delicately discuss that. That's why having both used gear and new gear is fantastic, and all of the brands, because there's literally something for everybody, and in every price range. So we really try and find out what the goals are of the person, and we point them in the right direction. We really don't try and sell anything here. That's not what we do. We try to provide a solution for what the customer tells us they need or they want. And that's the big thing. I mean, one of the beautiful parts of really not making a lot of profit on any new or used camera gear item is that we are totally objective. So it's not about anything that we want to do. It's about whatever the photographer wants to do. And that's really what's kind of kept us here for 30 plus years, for sure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know from having sold gear and traded gear that your staff is meticulous in how they go over the gear so that when it is sold or traded in, that next person who's going to enjoy that gear can rest assured that what they're getting is quality. Well, first of all, it's working, it's
Right.
quality, and that they know what they're getting. There's no surprises. So that peace of mind, along with the savings for a person who's buying that pre-owned gear, is a huge value. Huge value.
It's amazing how little some people use their gear. So we get some really, really wonderfully, not only price, but the condition of the used equipment that comes in is sometimes unbelievable. So, it does provide a good choice. I also understand that some people absolutely want something brand spanking new. They want to be the first human being to actually touch that product, and I get it. So that's why we try and have a little something for everybody.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And, Brooke, I just want to thank you for your generosity of time and spending time kind of talking through the origin of service photo and the evolution of the camera business. Just really appreciated your support and friendship over the years. And I appreciate you being on Artist Spotlight, the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. And believe me, if a photographer needs anything, they should not hesitate to contact us. No question or no problem is too large or small. We are here to help in every way possible.
That's great. That's great. Well, and I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this episode with Burke Seim. We definitely covered a lot, and hopefully you all got a lot out of it. For those of you who want to find out what I have going on, you can go online to mitchstringerimages.com. You can also check out what's probably the latest of what I have going on Instagram, also Mitch Stringer Images. So until next time, I wish you great light, great shooting, and we'll see you next time on Artist Spotlight.